Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the webinar about the Ghent project, CoGhent, or Collections of Ghent, as we have named it for the general public. I'm Ostyn. I work at the City of Ghent at the Strategic Funding Office, and I did the general management of the project. We have come to an end of a 3-year project period. We celebrated the project with a festival with over 300 people on the 2nd and the 3rd of June in the Vooruit in Ghent. Today, we try to bring you the essence of the project and its results, so that the achievements can also be disseminated internationally. This live webinar will be recorded and can also be viewed afterwards and circulated to the interested parties. The partners you see projected here, with them we have enjoyed working for these 3 years. That seems like a simple consortium, but it involves 19 different services, organizations and companies. More than 120 people have worked on this project spread over time. And then I'm not even talking about the volunteers who have put their shoulders under the project and the 13 companies or organizations that have been working with the data from the Collections of Ghent. You are rightly curious where this has brought us. So what do we have for you today? To start with, a representative of the European Commission will welcome us. Madame Marie-Pierre Jouglain. CoGhent was co-financed by the European Regional Development Fund through the Urban Innovative Actions Initiative. After a short introductory video about the project, Olivier Van D'huynslager, digital strategist at Design Museum Gent and also one of the driving forces behind this project, will take us through the what, why and how of CoGhent. Then we take a closer look at the project results. Bas Baccarne of Ghent University will take care of this. He was in charge of the research that happened during this project. But what do all these results mean for you if you want to set up a similar project in other cities and other European countries? François Jégou, a specialist in strategic design scenarios and designated expert for the UIA Secretariat, he will give us his external reflection and explains what the project can mean to you in terms of transferability to other cities. Afterwards, you will have the opportunity to ask questions to the panel present here. I will introduce them to you shortly later on. But for now, I have the honor to give the floor to Marie-Pierre Jouglain, who will officially welcome us as Program Manager EU Policies at the European Commission, Directorate-General for Regional and Urban Policy.
Dear CoGhent final event participants, on behalf of the European Commission, I'm happy to welcome you to this webinar, where you will discuss in depth the results of the project Collection of Ghent and the way ahead. Cities are home to 3 out of 4 Europeans. They are our closest link to the citizens. They are the engines that drive the European economy and the place where innovation happens. Cities are also the main line of response to many challenges that face us, such as air quality, sustainable mobility, social inclusion, or the preservation of our cultural heritage. The Urban Innovative Action is an initiative by the European Commission which enables cities to test innovative solutions to address urban challenges. It empowers European urban authorities to take risks and explore more innovative and creative solutions that traditional funding sources may not support. In the 2014-2020 programming period, 86 projects divided into 14 categories got more than 300 million euros from the European Regional Development Fund, 6 of which were carried out in Flanders. With this funding, the Urban Innovative Action Initiative has provided urban authorities throughout Europe with resources to test innovative answers to the complex challenges related to sustainable urban development. The project CoGhent, which was financially supported by the European Regional Development Fund to 80%, is one of those answers. It has become a practical case of how cities can innovate and experiment with companies, academia, and civil society in the local ecosystem. The cohesion policy's motto is no one left behind. This is exactly what the city of Ghent did with its approach into the CoGhent concept. Using digitized cultural heritage to impact social cohesion in the city in a co-creative process. I believe that knowledge and experiences of the project founded by the innovative action should be accessible to others, especially to those urban authorities that did not benefit from that funding directly. For example, as regards the CoGhent project, it will be interesting to observe how it further develops within the city and potentially inspires replication in another city. We should turn innovative and avant-garde ideas from being exclusive and exhaustible into a real European public good. This is why I am delighted that the CoGhent project team organized this final event to share their experience and the lessons learned with others via the European urban action. I wish you very fruitful discussions.
Thank you very much, Marie-Pierre Jouglain. After the presentations about the project and its results, you will have the opportunity to ask questions. You can really ask us anything. Do you want more information about something, or are you curious about the strategy or reasoning behind certain project lines? Seize your moment. I'm telling you this now, so you can write down any questions you might have as you listen. So we save the questions for after the presentations, but you can put them already in the chat. If there are no questions, we will start the conversation based on questions that have been assigned in advance. Pieter-Jan Pauwels, Digital Innovation Lead at District 09, and the second driving force behind this project, will steer this conversation in the right direction. Olivier Van D'huynslager and Bas Baccarne are a part of the panel, and David Slosse, working for the City of Ghent, will join the panel based on his expertise in the participation and co-creation. But first, to give you an idea of this large and versatile project, we would like to show you our project video. Have fun watching and listening.
Is Collections of Ghent a way of leveraging cultural heritage to enhance social cohesion with and between citizens? A conversation starter to uncover hidden stories in neighbourhoods, a path to digitisation and bringing together cultural heritage on a city level, an experiment to show cultural heritage through digital experiences, an opportunity for citizens to show how they would use heritage objects. Yes, it is all of this and more. But first, let's start at the beginning. The city of Ghent in Belgium. Aside from being the pocket-sized metropolis in the heart of Europe, we're also a city with a rich history and a diverse heritage collection. Heritage thus far enclosed in museums and archives, stressing the need to open this up to the citizens by both the museums and the city. Not just by showing it, but actively testing it as assets to improve social cohesion and inclusion. With a mission to uncover a treasure trove of knowledge and stories from both cultural heritage institutions as well as citizens. Exploration and innovation on the intersection of heritage, participation, data and technology are key elements of Collections of Ghent. We have digitized and opened up an invaluable collection of more than 75,000 objects from the Design Museum Ghent, City Museum Stam, Ghent Archives, Huis van Aline, Museum of Daily Life and Industry Museum. Bringing heritage together and opening it up in a digital way is no small feat. To put it simply, we used linked open data standards to combine metadata and imagery of heritage objects. This enables us to create both an open API and an online web platform to give full access to the city's collection. Perhaps not that simple. Let's keep it at this. The culture heritage organizations did everything in their power to digitize and open up as many objects as possible in a way that anyone could access them, download them, and reuse them freely on the online platform. To stimulate reuse, we also started a co-creation fund as mini grants to incentivize citizens, companies, and academia to create societal value with this shared heritage. They could build anything they wanted with the heritage, from podcasts to theatre pieces, neighborhood activities, art installations to digital applications, as long as it encouraged citizens to discover new heritage and bring them together. And we didn't settle for just a fund. We established a cultural data lab, a place for experimentation, events, workshops, and activities to show what is possible with these digitized assets. Organizing a hackathon with more than 100 students and companies. Organizing workshops highlighting how other museums can implement open standards. Challenging creatives in the city into designing GIFs to bring static imagery to life. Nothing was too far-fetched, so that we could learn which format works best to stimulate heritage reuse with different target groups and goals. Apart from reuse, we wanted to explore how digitized cultural heritage could be used as a conversation starter within neighborhoods by bringing the collection back to life in a physical way. That's why we built the CoGhent box. A mobile digital experience room traversing through 3 very different neighborhoods in Ghent. For 3 months, this box served as a central place at each location so that local citizens could experience the digital collection, as well as a third place to host activities through community workers, heritage professionals, and citizens themselves. We didn't focus on current museum goers, but mainly on both new, potential, and unserved audiences residing in the different Ghent neighborhoods. We wanted to see how we can improve social cohesion from the perspective of cultural heritage, by using this perspective to show how a neighborhood evolved, its history, but also what elements are still lacking in the collection today. It engages long-time residents to look back into the past and tell their story, but also reaches out to newcomers to get a deeper sense of the origins of their neighborhood and how it may relate to their own respective background and stories. This proved to be the magic of the project. It uncovered untold stories or allowed existing ones to materialize based on newfound connections. Caravan dwellers, children growing up in working class areas, ever-evolving textile industry, and the forgotten skipper history are just some of the 20th century stories that came to be. In short, Collections of Ghent explored the potential of using digitized cultural heritage to improve social cohesion and inclusion, to enable co-creation and participation, to give a full view of the city's rich culture. By networking and linking this material, we want to increase the use of cultural heritage and lower the museum threshold. All project findings will be integrated into DING, the new wing of the Design Museum Ghent, where the experiment will continue. Curious for more? All the information about the project's process and results are available online on collections.ghent.
Hello everyone, my name is Olivier and I'm very honored to be here today to talk you through the project. I want to give a brief introduction or a brief recollection of how I experienced this project, and it were 3 very exciting years. But before we can start thinking about what we really did and why we did it, we have to go back even further in time, back to 2019, where the city of Ghent launched an open call to submit for the UIA project. And then me and Pieter-Jan Pauwels from District 09 took on the challenge to write a short proposal of 2 pages to think about how can we open up digital collections of cultural heritage, and how can we engage with the people of Ghent and also leverage linked open data at the same time. And this idea, of course, also had a lot to do with the fact that we were also thinking at the same time of the reopening of the museum, back then still in 2023, now it's postponed to 2026, but we had to think about how can we really bring in these digitized collections to create new kinds of interactions and experiences for our audiences. This also was inspired by another project that was developed by Pieter-Jan Pauwels, Museum of Things for People, where we were trying to figure out how can we leverage indoor positioning technology to track people within the exhibition space, and then create a kind of recommender engine that will recommend them to other places in the city. This, in fact, also pointed out to us to be because there were no data points or no data endpoints in the city readily available to connect with. So we also went a step further, and there was this project, the hackathon called Apps for Ghent, where there was also this idea of the white box, which was basically a small museum, a shoebox-sized museum that would have been placed in one of the main public squares in Ghent to also introduce bypassers to this heritage. So we wrote an abstract, a 2-pager, and then we were granted the opportunity by the city to further develop it into an actual proposal, an application form, which also meant that we have to find and motivate partners. We had to write, I think, a document of almost 90 pages. We had to distribute an amount of almost 5 million to 6 million euros. And we had to do this in a very brief time. I think we only had a few months to do this. And so we devised very quickly what will become the project today, the main work packages based on, okay, we need to communicate this project, we need to also engage people in the neighborhoods, we need to build this whole technological infrastructure, and we also need to think about what interfaces can bring this to the public, to the open space. Okay. We won the abstract, and we wrote the proposal in, as I said before, 1.5 months. And back in 2019, maybe this might seem a little bit outdated, we started from the premise that most cities were already digitizing their cultural heritage, but they often lack the tools to leverage this rich data in order to engage their citizens. And that was mainly due to the data being stuck in what we call silos or silos. And the data, if it wasn't stuck, it didn't really have the interfaces to reach new audiences. So that also meant that citizens were not able to engage or were not engaged to use, reuse, adapt, or discuss this digitized cultural heritage or cultural heritage in the broader sense. And how we thought to tackle these issues was, first we needed to link and connect all these cultural data from 5 cultural heritage institutions, ranging from museums to the city archive. And then we need to also develop and think of tools and methods to speed up this publication, because there was still a lot of data illiteracy within the cultural heritage institutions. And we then, in order to really bring it into the public space, we need to think about how are we going to visualize this, and how can we also transmit this in a kind of immersive digital experience, and then test this in 3 neighborhoods. But we also needed tools for crowdsourcing to really engage and open up the conversation. So we won the project, and when did we start? Actually, when we were granted, or when we were on the project, we only had 3 days to start the project. And that that was really challenging for a lot of our partners. So again, we had to refigure out, okay, who were these partners? What did they tell us in the application form? And then we needed to hire a lot of people as well. For example, a data team, which were 5 full-time employees who really worked on data cleaning, on opening up this data in these cultural heritage institutions, and again, opening up these silos. But then, unfortunately, COVID came, which put us back to the drawing board, and maybe this is a reality for a lot of people, but that also meant that we had to do a lot, and I mean a lot of online calls, which wasn't always the best format to have these really broad, open conversations on really challenging topics. So back to the drawing board. Is COVID here to stay? Nobody knows, but still we had to move forward, and we had our milestones, our outputs were defined, so we couldn't stop. We couldn't really take a rest. And then at the same time, we also had to think, whilst everything was closed and people were amidst the lockdown, which neighborhoods are we going to head over to? And this was a conversation that we did with a lot of parties within the city, and a lot of methodologies were used in this process. Things like figuring out where are social activities already taking place, where are social workers already active within the city, but also trying to figure out what are like methodologies on what is the biggest impact and highest effort, etc. But at the same time, we also went into the neighborhoods, and this was a really very thankful methodology, where they also interviewed citizens from within the neighborhood and asked them, okay, imagine that a kind of box in an immersive room filled with all this digitized cultural heritage would come here. What would it mean for you? What would be the value? What would be what would be non-value, essentially? And then once we figured out, okay, now we have these 3 neighborhoods, we had to try and figure out, okay, what are we going to do in these 3 neighborhoods? What are like the cues? What is like happening over there? What are hot topics? What is content-wise interesting? Is there a history in the city? Is there something that's vibrant right now? And that also showed us that we had really a lot of voices and a ton of entry points, but we also had to decide, okay, this is what we're going to do. And then actually, almost at the same time, we had to translate this to what are we going to build, and how are we going to build it, and how are we going to bring it to these neighborhoods. And this is where we really started to diverge in order to then converge in the end. And we did this with a lot of voices, and we tried to include a lot of people within this process through open calls, where we engaged students to build like their prototype on how would this immersive experience room look like, ranging from I mean, these are just some examples. Some were really expressive and really creative. But then, of course, we also had a design studio involved, and they then took all this input and took all this research also from like the neighborhood conversations in order to start thinking about, okay, what are we going to actually build? And because we were in the midst of a pandemic and there was a lockdown, we had to also think about circulation and how can we also do this in a way that people aren't afraid to enter. So the first thing was like, maybe we should just build a party tent and put something in there. And this evolved to like these kiosks with barbecue stands, with a lavatory, to things that were again more closed. And then all these things at one point also had to converge into a really big document, which was our strategic and conceptual development guidelines, that would then further inform us on the next steps based on what software do we need, what hardware, and all these kind of things. And then we also, these things informed us in the actual interfaces within the box, which ranged from like these views with a map, where all these heritage things were then pointed on a map, and you would experience heritage from a more geospatial perspective, or based on audiovisual cues, based on colors, all these kind of things. So just some impressions. And then again, we took these kind of first drawings back to the neighborhoods, the 3 neighborhoods that we have chosen. And we again started up the conversation. Is this meaningful for you? What are we missing? Are we going the wrong way? Or are we heading the wrong way? To really also try and introduce their thoughts in this whole process. as well. And this is what it eventually became, very abstract. It was a bigger room than we first expected, but this was also due to COVID, and we really needed to take into account that people needed to have like 1.5 meters distance from each other, but still have this social experience. So it needed to be big enough in order to accommodate a group of people, so it wasn't reduced to like an individual experience of our cultural heritage. So this is what it looked like, and then just then we're going forward. We had to actually build it, and that is when it got really exciting. We did this together with Fisheye. But what was really exciting when we started to build it is that you really see that all these partners involved, from software developers to this architects to interaction designers, that they all are really thinking in other perspectives, and they have these other ways of devising a solution to a certain problem. And for example, the software designed over here had buttons that were way too low, which were not really good for people's back. So that also made us rebalance everything again. And this is like a whole process. And also the box was then built, and we had these interfaces, but then we also had to populate it with content. So we had to think about, okay, we are in these 3 neighborhoods. What are we going to talk about? Let's say we talk about the history of the neighborhood, but where is this content? And who's actually going to build these stories? What voices do we have to introduce in there? Who's going to record it? Do we need voiceovers, etc.? And that is one of these images shows how many people were sitting around the table to really figure this out. Then we headed into the first neighborhood, and the main sentiment over there was a bit struggling. What are we doing here? We had all this kind of entry points, we had all this kind of voices, social workers, museum workers, people from the archive, researchers all coming together, and still felt a little bit like they were all apart. And maybe just to say, the first neighborhood, we were really close to like a residential care center, which was also an audience that we didn't really engage with previously. So also that meant for us challenges in order to engage with them. But things started building up. We did some activities. There was like a contest where the whole neighborhood was involved, and people started really seeing the value of this box, of this presence of cultural heritage within the neighborhood, mainly as a kind of social activator to bring people together, as a sort of conversation starter. And one of the things that we did, we had somebody who really, like a historian who really delved into things that were happening in the neighborhood, and she did something with caravan dwellers who were located also in this first neighborhood in Wondelhem, and they were really amazed or really impressed. So they were maybe they became emotional by seeing that their story was also brought into this broader cultural heritage story. And this is something that we then started to see, that maybe these little kind of things had a really big impact. So how can really involve people and make it very human-centered story. Then we moved to the second neighborhood, and then we started to get comfortable, not only with the box and how to use it, we also started to get comfortable with all the partners and all the people involved around the box. We also had the luck that the weather was nice. It was middle summer, and we really started doing a lot of activities. There were like concerts. We did things with chairs from the Design Museum where people could really explain or express how they felt about design, or design almost as a kind of conversation starter. But at the same time, we were, of course, also still building the software and still working on opening up all this data in order to fill it with the content that was necessary to really make the box really an attractive space. And we won some awards for that in Flanders. Like, this is one, I think, for the most sustainable API of the year. But we also did a lot of dissemination activities. This was the Day of Science in the City Library de Krook. And we also did very exciting things, like we organized a hackathon where almost, I think, 120 people joined us to think about, okay, now this data is open, what can you actually do with this data? And they also came with a lot of prototypes, but it also showed us maybe the things that were missing in the way we expressed the data. And then maybe for us it was like the end point, or it was like the last neighborhood, This is where we really started getting traction. This is where we really started, where people involved really started trying to use this kind of platform to tell their own stories, to use it as a platform to do their own activities, and not only people involved within the city or within the project itself, but also people from the neighborhood. So that was really, exciting that we could give it back to them and that they also felt like it was a platform for them to do things. We still kept doing a lot of dissemination. We still kept inspiring people on how we worked with data. We tried to also educate people or inspire them on things to do. And that resulted in this kind of co-creation fund. I'm just going to go back one slide, where people then could build their own applications or their own experiences with this data, and which we then showcased at the CoGhent festival. And this for us was like, I think, the last picture that we took at the box, and it showcases, I think, that we were one maybe big happy family at the end, or a lot of people thought we were a big happy family. And this is maybe also the time for me to really thank all these very amazing people who worked on the project. As Line expressed earlier, there were no less than 120 people involved. And this is like kind of my impression of what the project was, but I'm quite sure if somebody else would tell this story, it would be a completely different story, and that wouldn't matter. It just shows how diverse and how inclusive and how many voices were involved in this process. But as I mentioned before, we initially wrote this project with the thought that the museum would reopen in 2023. But as all construction sites go, it has now been postponed to 2026. And we had to find a solution to house all this software and hardware and this interactive installation. And we are really grateful that the Public Library of the Krook gave us a part of their space to set up this immersive experience where it will be engaged with for the coming 3 years, which is also very exciting. So yeah, thank you.
Okay, thank you, Olivier, for this introduction. Following up is my part on the results and impacts. You already saw some impressions in the video. Olivier told his personal story, but in the coming 20 minutes we will dive a bit deeper in what this project actually wanted to do, what the goals were, and to what extent we were actually able to meet these goals and reach the desired impact. 20 minutes is not a lot, so some things will be a bit quick, perhaps a bit abstract, but feel free to ask questions, and then we will tackle them afterwards in the panel. And there are also extensive reports that will be available on our website very soon. But let's dive into the material of the results and the impacts. So in the beginning, there we are. Okay. So once upon a time, where did the story actually start? Olivier told the story of the reality from a personal perspective, but what we actually wanted to achieve is to explore what the potential benefit could be of combining 3 different domains. The first domain being social cohesion, neighborhood activities. The second domain being cultural heritage, things that are typically found into the collections of the Cultural Heritage Institutes. And then a third component, the world of technology, digital objects, and all kinds of digital interactions that are possible with these digitized cultural heritage assets. So what could be the benefit, or what could be the added value of combining these 3 domains to strengthen each other in mutual ways? That was kind of the goal of this project, and I will take you in the next minutes, I will take you through some of our insights regarding this topic. So before we can dive into this topic, we need to disentangle what social cohesion actually is. If we talk about neighborhood cohesion, social cohesion, what do we actually mean by that? And in our project, we disentangled social cohesion into 3 different subdomains. The first one is the interactions you have with fellow neighborhood residents, both in quantity, the amount of people you're in touch with or you know more or less, and also in quality, how you perceive these interactions. Do you trust them? Do you like them? Will you ask some people in your neighborhood for help if you need help, for example? So that's everything that's related to relationships between people inside a neighborhood. Then a second dimension is the extent to which a common neighborhood identity is formed, whether you feel connected to a neighborhood and whether you share the same values, the same stories and the same ID, the community aspect of a neighborhood. And if those two components work really well, then we have a third component, and that's the aspect of common goals or shared goals that really make the social cohesion actionable by leveraging the collective capacity or collective power of neighborhood residents to also come up and actually improve their neighborhood. So this is how we understood social cohesion, and what we try to do, or how we related that to cultural heritage, is that cultural heritage can add to this development of a common neighborhood identity through the practice of sharing stories. And this is what is supported by the community infrastructure theory, and also the things that we know at an academic level about how storytelling networks in neighborhoods really work. So what this basically means is that through the act of telling stories to each other, we kind of share knowledge and we share values about what we think our neighborhood defines and what the common assets or common ideas of these neighborhoods are. So it helps the development of an identity, but also the act of storytelling itself is already also a way to interact with others and perhaps also increase the network of people that you know inside your neighborhood. So that's the high-level conceptual model we use. But of course, we took a very, you heard it in the previous talks and videos, we took a very strong neighborhood take on this project. What that means is that we should also understand a neighborhood as an infrastructure on itself. A neighborhood is built up out of different what we call assets or capacities, things like squares or benches or snack bars, schools and stuff like that. And the combination of all these different aspects defines what the infrastructure of the neighborhood is, and defines also how people can and will interact inside this physical environment. So we have these physical aspects, things I mentioned, but also people inside these neighborhoods, stories that are sometimes hidden, sometimes not hidden inside these neighborhoods, are all considered assets inside such a community. So what we try to do is maximally leverage these assets, build maximally upon what is already there, the people, the engagements, the communities, the infrastructure that is already there, and see how we, with our initiative, could actually not reinvent these things, but leverage or catalyze or improve or strengthen the things that are already out there. And then the third component, if we look at the relationship between technology and cultural heritage, we see that a lot of heritage institutes are experimenting, with a lot of highly immersive installations that have a high wow factor, or exploring digitized heritage to do more research-based activities like analyzing color patterns or evolutions of styles over time and stuff like that. But in our project, we identified three main domains which we wanted to explore further. And the first one was to actually mine for new assets, new stories. So go out there into the neighborhoods and see if technology could help us to discover valuable artifacts and stories inside the neighborhoods and capture them in a sustainable way. The second thing was to disclose these digitized heritage, which are often in a traditional way hidden in depots, or only part of the collection is shown within the museum space. But if we disclose this in a more open way, we were wondering what could happen if we open this up and let others also do other things that were perhaps not foreseen by the traditional cultural heritage institute. And that closely relates to then the third aspects, and that's what is possible if we allow this heritage to be transformed, to be mixed and molded, to be translated into new interactive systems developed by third parties that could help us interact with these artifacts in a perhaps more engaging or inspiring or refreshing way. That was the third pillar that we wanted to explore. So all these ideas sound very nice in theory, and they're very nice as like an academic framework, but of course you are probably interested to know what actually was achieved, what these goals actually learned us, and what we picked up as learnings also for future projects. So to begin with, and that's something that Olivier also mentioned, we have achieved significant results in what could be defined as under-the-hood technology. What we have done with the development of the technological artifacts, the infrastructure, the implementation of things like Oslo and LDAS, both technology and open standard approaches to these data storage and disclosure. We are really a very significant project that also received significant attention to show what these technologies can mean in a cultural context, and how things like cultural heritage could be much easier linked, more easily scanned and browsed and disclosed in a way that was previously not possible. So besides all the ambitions on social cohesion and social goals, purely on the technological level, we achieved significant results that hopefully are also inspiring for other cities or other actors in this domain to look at and build further upon. But this was not the only thing. Like this LDAS Oslo system is like the raw material, the raw stuff, the environment, the enabling environment that allowed us to build up layers on. And the first layer that we built up upon this space infrastructure was ways to explore these raw assets in a digital way. So we built, as you saw in the video also, a web platform that allowed people that perhaps are not developers or less familiar or have less time to freely explore what is in the data, to look for connections, to engage with these connections and so on. So that allows digital exploration, but of course a lot of attention and also a lot of investments went to the development of physical experiences that were built upon these digital assets and allowed new ways to engage in the public space with these digitized heritage artifacts. So this layered model actually allowed two ways of value creation. The first one, as you can see also in the slide, is top-down. It allowed a new way to top-down engage audiences in new ways with the cultural heritage collections, and also enrich this. So as you saw in the video, we allowed citizens to add assets to this collection, to add stories to this connection. So this allows to actually enrich these raw materials at the bottom. At the other side, starting from the bottom to the top, we created an environment that allowed new actors to do something with these raw materials. So we take away the privilege of cultural heritage institutes to decide what they do with the collection and opened it up to a larger community of people and to let them freely develop new stuff that we didn't control, didn't manage in ways that were previously not possible. So it empowered these people and it allowed for the democratization of digitized cultural heritage. But if we then look at the societal value creation, what the actual impact at the neighborhood level was of this combination of these three domains, neighborhood level, cultural heritage and technology, we dived a bit deeper and we went into the neighborhoods, talk with the different stakeholders, neighborhood residents and so on. And I will briefly take you through some key insights, of course not everything, but some key insights that might perhaps spark discussion in the chat or might spark your interest to read the reports later on. A first thing that we noticed, and perhaps this is a bit of an open door, is that cultural heritage and social cohesion, the neighborhood level, strengthen each other in both ways. So through telling stories and sharing heritage components, the neighborhoods become stronger, and also by engaging with these neighborhoods, the heritage and the collections and the cultural heritage institutes become richer. What we saw is that both the project and the technology actually work as an instigator that boosts this interaction. So at the level of the project, the fact that we experimented for a short period of time, of course, has several downsides because a 3-month period is rather short. But the way that we boosted the temporary energy on a single point in time and place actually helped to speed up several processes and to do things faster that would otherwise perhaps take much more time. And then also the technology, it doesn't create something new, it doesn't create a new interaction, but it actually strengthens what is already there. It strengthens the relationship between these artifacts and between the people that engage with these artifacts and the other way around. And what we see there is that the box or the physical infrastructure, the white space, whatever you want to call it, actually acted as some sort of boundary object, which is like a physical place where different worlds that would otherwise not be connected can come together and interact with each other in a way that would not be possible without such an object. So you should see it as like an environment that connects worlds, connects ecosystems, connects cultures in some way. And at the first level, this effect takes place at the resident level. The box brought residents together from all kinds of backgrounds. It sparked interest from all kinds of backgrounds and brought people together in the neighborhood that would perhaps otherwise not meet with each other. At the same time, it provided a certain platform, an open space where organizations, communities that are already active in the neighborhoods could act upon, and it was like a stage where they could also do their own stuff at this place, so they could leverage it as an instrument for their own goals and their own purposes. And then a third component is the Cultural Heritage Institutes themselves, in which we saw that the boundary object, the CoGhent box, allowed cultural heritage to enrich or empower the way that they do their outreaching activities outside the walls of the museum institutes, the brick and mortar aspects of the institutes. We then further disentangled, so we had this facility, this place-based aspects of the box, but then we further disentangled the impact or the added value at two levels. The first level is the neighborhood level, in which we look at social cohesion and neighborhood participation and so on. And then at the bottom, you see here also at the level of heritage institutes, we see that we looked at things like, did we reach new audiences, new publics, did we enrich the collection, and so on. So we took these two stances, the neighborhood stance and the Cultural Heritage Institute stance, as a starting point for our analysis and to further study the impact of our project. So what we saw is that, of course, as I mentioned before, these two strengthen each other, and they do it at several levels. At the level of the neighborhood, we see that bringing cultural heritage in these neighborhoods using this high-tech infrastructure brings new perspectives and adds new channels for neighborhood residents to participate in cultural participation, cultural consumption, and so on. On the other hand, I mentioned that for Cultural Heritage Institutes, this infrastructure allowed for enhanced outreaching work and also allowed them to reach or engage new publics. I will go a bit deeper on that in one of my next slides. At the bottom then, you see that two things that are very important in this project is that at the residence level, we actually increased the sense of ownership and the sense of belonging. Sense of belonging relates to how people relate to their neighborhood, and sense of belonging relates to how residents relate to like a broader idea of identity development and understanding your place in what is cultural heritage and what is also considered as cultural heritage in a city. So regarding sense of belonging, we see that this initiative succeeded in increasing knowledge of this shared local history, which contributes to this shared local identity, but it also brought very explicitly together different perspectives on this neighborhood, different cultures, different stories that are sometimes conflicting, and we actually looked for these differences and tried to use this project as a leverage to make sure that people understood the other in the neighborhood a bit better, to thereby increase trust and increase social cohesion. So this contributed to increased recognition of the neighborhood, of the other in the neighborhood, and improved to this development of a shared neighborhood identity. Then at the level of the ownership of what cultural heritage is and who defines what is inside or outside the collection, what is curated or not, we saw that adding their own assets but also adding their own stories to the platform, that increased to a sense of belonging that added not only to making sure that they felt represented in the collections, but also contributing to their understanding of their own story in relationship to also other stories. So it helped to improve like this more holistic view on what heritage is and understanding your own place in that. Did we reach new publics? From the perspective of the Cultural Heritage Institutes, we definitely did. We mainly reached audiences that are considered typical audiences that are attracted to activities inside the neighborhoods. So for professionals regarding neighborhood activities, these people were like the known people that also come to other events and so on. But these neighborhoods residents are not per se also people that go to a museum, for example. So in that sense, we reached publics that were not really reached with traditional museum activities. And then we did reach also some specific populations, and some of them are mentioned on the slide here. We did reach citizens with migration background that are otherwise difficult to reach. Also adolescents or senior citizens, especially in the elderly healthcare center. Citizens with lower socioeconomic status, senior citizens, youngsters, also more vulnerable, psychologically vulnerable people. But then why did these people come to the box? Why did they interact with our project and our activities? We saw that the motivation most of the time did not really relate to cultural participation. People came to our initiative because they felt attracted to the social aspect to it, but most of the time also because there was free food and free drinks. And that the way that they then came into contact with cultural heritage was more like accidental or serendipitous in nature. Nevertheless valuable, but we need to understand this very well to also do future projects in this regard correctly. So what we created was like a machine, an engine that brings together cultural heritage and the neighborhood level, the residents. But what is really important to say is that to make this engine run, to make this thing work, you need a lot of people. So by building technology by itself is not enough. You can build a box, you can build a web platform, you can digitize cultural heritage. But to make all these things work, to actually deliver this impact or the value I mentioned in the previous slides, you need a lot of people to work on that. You need people to actively stand by the box and invite people in, otherwise very few people will actually engage with your technology. Or if you create web platforms like this, in which you can add your stories and stuff like that, it doesn't work if you don't put a lot of people effort in there. So if any of the other viewers here in this webinar would be interested in doing similar things, never underestimate, and perhaps this is something that you already know, but I nevertheless want to highlight it, never underestimate the power and the resources, the people resources you need to make such projects work and to deliver the value promise of these technologies. Are we then ready to take off, or will we explode mid-air? In the beginning of the project, we all started with a lot of enthusiasm, but we didn't really know what we were going to build. So after a couple of months, that enthusiasm kind of translated to confusion. We didn't really know what we were going to do, what we were going to build. We're also a bit lost in translation somehow, bridging these different domains. But somehow things worked out. We launched, we went to the neighborhoods, we went hard, we went fast. But are we there yet, or will we explode mid-air? That's still a question that remains, because perhaps this will also link to François' talk, which will follow up my talk. We'll dive in a bit deeper. But what did we reach? What do we want to keep? Is like one of the final questions that we wanted to answer within this project. We don't have a final answer on that question yet. Perhaps that can also be a topic that we can tackle in the panel later on. But to make these things work, to make sure that technology, economy, and policy go together, we did a lot of strategic workshops, and we also wrote an output or a document on that you can read if you're interested in that. But what we kind of concluded is that if we want to leverage or keep doing what we did here, we need like a prolonged way of working this way. We need to do this more than these 3-month interventions in these different neighborhoods. And to do that, we need, on the one hand, the technological artifacts, which you see at the right side of my slide, what we call the CoGhent system, both the dumps, the LDES, the web portal, and the box. We need that kind of technology to facilitate, to support this integrated way of working in which cultural heritage institutes can work together with neighborhood professionals and so on. So if that technology remains in place, we have like 3 main domains that we want to keep, or that we believe that should be invested in the long term. And the first thing is like a collaboration or a partnership, an ecosystem that keeps on talking with each other across these different domains. So we hope that after this project ends, that we don't all go back to our own silos and keep doing what we did before without ever talking to each other again. And if we do that, we can build a common way of working in which we keep leveraging the value of this outreaching way of working with heritage in the neighborhoods and deliver this value over the long term. Because of course, if you want to have impact, 3 months is not sufficient. You need to do these things 3, 4, perhaps even 6 or 10 years. And then a final thing that I want to mention here is that to do that well, it should not all start with people in a consortium like this. We have a lot of partners, but to make this thing really work, we need to look for ways of managing these ecosystems that also allow others to take the initiative. And one of the things that really worked well in this project is to work with the co-creation fund that allows third parties to develop stuff and that were also stimulated financially. So in the future, if we would do these things, we would definitely need to invest in a platform like this to stimulate reuse and to allow the ecosystem to flourish. So I hope with that I provided an overview of some key results and impacts, but I'm now happy to give the floor to François Jégou, which was an external review member of this project, which will share a bit of light now on how he looked at our project and what he believes should be sustained over time. So I'm very curious to hear what you have to say, François.
Do you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Yes. Okay, thank you. Sorry. I was saying that I was not with you, and this would be a bit a pity because it's a big day for conclusion and of this beautiful project. I'm very honored, and thank you, Bas, for finding another word for me as a sort of external reviewer and not an expert, because the word used by urban innovative action is a bit strange. I'm a sort of rather a critical friend and maybe a journalist. And as a journalist, if you put the next slide, I am supposed to produce the next one. I am supposed to produce a series of articles that bring a sort of external point of view, the one of a potential reader that is interested maybe on all what you have developed and discussed, and also raise questions, and that's maybe a good link for the next panel session. I will browse some of these articles, this ongoing discussion that you can find on the CoGhent Urban Innovative Action website. So next slide. One of the first articles was saying, okay, we are beginning with a lot of partners, a lot of ingredients, and we were wondering, as Bas just conclude, a bit lost in translation, what would be the final cake that would be built by this ingredient, or the final cakes that CoGhent is aiming at. And I would like to come back first on this discussion that Bas presented on the impact, and on the fact that you, for the moment, looked at that both from the technology developed, the linked data event stream technology and experience in the box, and the action of the social workers, the event, the local non-for-profit, the volunteer around the box. And maybe if we distinguish them, this raises an interesting question to discuss. So is the impact, the potential impact on social cohesion, of course, it's an experimentation. It's a first level of development, so we should be mild and not expect too much from this first level of development and experimentation. But is the impact on social cohesion of a project due to the technology developed, or more due to the event, the actions of social workers that were organized? In a certain way, Ghent is a city which is world famous for the quality of its participation, and for sure the innovation is not there, because it's already 25 years that Ghent is very important in the European scene for the quality of this participation. So how did, in fact, the technology develop support, and or how it could support the work of a social engagement that is very important and very famous in Ghent? Maybe it's one. So I will finish each time with some questions that, of course, could be discussed during the panel session. Next slide, please. It seems, as Olivier was presenting it in the beginning of his presentation, that the box was called spontaneously by the inhabitants of a neighborhood as a sort of mini museum. And this question, for me, the design, this is my background, I'm a product designer, and the design of this first prototype, it's a box. collections are presented, so the CoGhent process is presented in a box. Whereas, in fact, CoGhent is a huge effort to open, to free collection out of museum, to put them out of the boxes, these silos in which we are. In some way, it's a bit a paradoxical design. I wanted to quote here one of the social workers that I interviewed in one of the videos that we posted. Matthias Lagarde was sort of questioning about this creating a new inside where, as you mentioned, Bas, it was necessary to have social workers and a lot of effort made to attract people to the technology. He was suggesting other possible orientations like why not having a very mobile van, or why not having a tablet? In fact, of really opening this technology in a flexible and agile tool for social engagement. That's also maybe an interesting question to discuss. How do you decline this technology in different media so that it enables it strengthens, as you say, Bas, more these already very good qualities present in Ghent around social participation. Next slide, please. Urban Innovative Action identified 7 challenges that are often touching the critical for innovation project. And in particular, how here opening cultural data may upscale or outscale. And here I remember Christine de Weert, the current director of the STAM Museum, the City Museum of Ghent, and she was talking in the first interview I made of her about the collections that the city has in this museum, the City Museum, which were a lot of Belgium culture in general, but not a lot of Turkish culture, she said, not a lot about other communities that are still constituting a very important share of the population. That's this project of creating a 6th collection, a bottom-up collection. And the CoGhent subject of how opening access to cultural heritage can enhance social cohesion it's important to underline it. It's a very sensitive subject in the Belgium country, in Europe, in the world, unfortunately, at the moment. And it's very courageous to take this subject about culture. Experiment and the impact assessment pointed that, as Bas, you mentioned, and you mentioned in the report, and I really encourage viewers to look at in depth this analysis. It pointed that the neighborhood inhabitants do have an interest in cultural heritage, and that enhance connectivity, interaction, belonging, etc. And very interesting point here. After the experimentation in the free neighborhood, the CoGhent technological infrastructure will be installed, as Olivier underlined, in the design museum. And here also it raised for an external viewer an interesting question, I think, why this huge effort of cultural institutions to reach out to citizens is going back in a cultural institution. So we know that it's only a first experimentation, a research action project, and will it be enough to attract people in museum? I wanted to quote someone that was the former head of policy participation in Ghent, Else Lecomte, that I had the chance to work with in a previous project. she said participation is not to raise citizen interest to what the city is doing, but to raise cities' interest in what citizens are doing. And here I think there is an interesting tension. CoGhent demonstrates a process on how to capture citizens' memories and stories, and how it raises questions like how to give back this culture to citizens, and in giving it back, are physical museum or even digital museum platform enough to give it back, to keep this interaction if you are not anymore traveling in the neighborhood. Next slide, please. This title is a little bit so at the beginning we develop an exercise of evil creativity. So evil creativity is to imagine not only all what could be achieved by the project, but at the beginning also to imagine all what may go wrong. And one of the key issues in opening data in general, not only opening cultural data, is will this data be reused? And here we have a topic that you tackle, Bas, of recombination of digitized cultural data. So you talk about this co-creation fund experimentation, which collected, I think, 13 projects. 8 of them were in a sort of creative category called creative project, and another one more technical project. 5 projects in the technical one. This is interesting because it's a second experimentation after the box that you made, which is probably more in line with the aligned with the spirit, the core spirit of a project of open data project, and you get sort of creative reuse beyond the CoGhent box experimentation. This raises also interesting question. What does this experimentation indicate in terms of reuse of cultural data? One of the stakeholders I interviewed said we get a lot of techie creative apps. I pick up one in the image, which is proposing to have a sort of collage, a collective collage from the element isolated from the collection. It's maybe very simple project, but it's interesting because it's a sort of maybe modern way to create a collective memory. It's a way of together selecting and gluing together and assembling elements that can tap very clearly into a social cohesion goal of a project. But at the end, we can also ask why, in fact, if, as you underline, all of you, that social cohesion through open cultural data is the goal, the overarching goal of a project, why didn't we have another category emerging from the co-creation fund that would be social cohesion? So how can we recombine cultural data for this ultimate goal? Last slide. Next, CoGhent. It's a little bit a page of advertisements. Lynn was introducing my talk at the beginning, saying that I would talk about possible way of follow-up, of reusing the elements that have been produced on the project. I think it's a big questions, not very simple question. So we acknowledge that CoGhent has reached an important stage of development, important products, important achievement, and what's next? How to ensure the sustainability of a project. So one of idea would be after everybody will will rest a little bit during the summer from all these 3 years of effort to explore more of the follow-up. Next CoGhent is a workshop that will take place at the end of August. The precise date is not fixed now. It's a projective design fiction exercise to enhance the perspective induced by the project and the great joint stakeholder effort that has been made. It will co-produce a series of medium long-term visual scenario enabled by CoGhent in an horizon of 15-20 years. So if you are stimulated by building more vision about all what has been achieved by CoGhent, so let's meet in end of August. So that's all for the point that I wanted to raise, and I pass the floor to Peter Jan for the rich panel discussion, I guess.
Thank you, François, and thank you for your positive critical view on the project. I think we've gotten some questions from that, and I will pick up on those shortly after. So welcome audience, I'm Peter Jan, one of the strategic coordinators of the project, and I'm here together with a lot of people you just saw during the different talks. I'm also here with David Slosse from the Policy Participation Service from the City of Ghent that also you just mentioned, François. And I think I want to pick up on the first question that François actually mentioned, and I'm going to head it over to Olivier, is why do we as cultural heritage institution do a lot of efforts in going to the neighborhoods with that boundary object called the CoGhent box to then come back and integrate it back into the museum? What was the thought trail behind that?
Well, I find it, first of all, very interesting that this box is seen as something paradoxical, because for me it isn't at all. I think it has a lot to do also with how people experience a museum, and they often only see the end product being the exhibition. But if you look at a physical exhibition, there's a road that goes before it, and you have a curator, and this curator needs to involve all these voices and needs to figure out how I'm going to populate this exhibition with all these living people, these living objects, and tell something meaningful. And that in and of itself is something very generous. But we also need to think about, okay, this box, if it is a mini museum, what is a museum and what is the museum experience? The museum experience is not only the physical visit in the physical space, but it's also the pre-visit and the post-visit. So what do we do before we visit and what do we do after we visit? And what I found really interesting is what François also said. I think Els mentioned that it's not about us trying to pull people in, but we need to go out there and really listen to people. And that's also what Nina Simon talks about in her really good book. I advise everybody to read it, The Art of Relevance, where she says, okay, museums need to stop opening up all these little doors that are all pointed at one single target audiences. Instead, they need to break open the already existing door and make it a lot more wider. And I guess that's the big opportunity that lies in this platform that has been the box. One way as a kind of probe, as a way to figure out what's living in these neighborhoods and how can we put it inside the already existing infrastructure. And I think the whole digital thing and the whole phygital thing is something that could be really interesting to think about, that because it allows for more voices than are allowed in a physical space, because you're limited to the room in which you can exhibit your objects. And that's, of course, a challenge that we will have to face in 2026. But I don't see this as two opposing worlds. I see it as an as a really conversation starter and something that can bridge the museum with these neighborhoods without limiting ourselves to only this one view of the neighborhood. And that's, I think, the platform that the museum can be. Yeah.
Okay, great question. Bas, do you want to pick up on that?
Yeah, I think what is also interesting is that we indeed, if you summarize it like that, create a museum in a box and then put it back in a museum, that doesn't seem like the right way to approach these potential benefits. So what I think that we also learned also through the Co-Creation Fund is that there's a lot of potential of creating more like an experimental environment, whether it be in a box that goes from neighborhood to neighborhood or whether to put it into a museum, but to create like an environment where new ways of exploring and interacting is possible, and not only technologies that are being developed top-down, but also trying to facilitate also a space where bottom-up initiatives can kind of materialize and be explored with. So that perhaps might also challenge a bit of the lingering ideas that you already had in the design museum, but can perhaps be leveraged in the future also using this technology.
Because in a way, and was mentioned by you, Bas, the box was also limited in the visitors that it attracted, being that they were only visitors that were already active in the neighborhoods. And as a museum, as a city museum, or as a city design museum, or an archive, you try to put all these voices together, and you want to tell the story of Ghent, or the story of the physical boundaries of Ghent, of what's happening in Ghent, and not only what's happening in these neighborhoods. I think that is now the next step that museums should try to figure out. How can we leverage these findings and learnings from these 3 different neighborhoods and tell an overarching stories without compromising their own identity? I think that's something very generous, and that's something that a museum can really offer as a public space, as a forum, as a place to bring people together and start the conversation.
Yeah, thank you. I think it also relates to a quote from your own director, Catherine Laporte, from the Design Museum Ghent. A lot of the design objects here in the museum were never born here in the museum, but are from the neighborhood, and we just brought them together into this physical space. But how do we move it and turn it back around, and how do we perceive it from that way? So that's a very interesting one. Did you want to pick up as well, David?
I think that the box was for many of the citizens in Ghent a first step up to discover the collection of the city of Ghent. And now they can discover the museum. That's in one direction. But at the other direction, it's also interesting because the museum has discovered now 3 neighborhoods. But it doesn't stop right there. There are a lot of, many more neighborhoods, and there's a lot of hidden heritage and hidden stories that are still left. And that's maybe the next step that should be set.
It's really about what is still missing within those collections, and how can we mine that as well. Okay. Thank you, very interesting. So for you guys at home, I will always prioritize your questions if you put them on the YouTube page right now, but I'm having also a few questions that we got from different people from the different European conference we were at, and a few colleagues who had different questions. And so to just go further on this question, I'm going to start with Olivier. It's also, aside from that box, why go for a digital experience? Why did you go for both a web platform and also a physical experience within those neighborhoods? What was the initial thought about that?
I think the main thought of going for a phygital interface is because we really wanted it to be a social experience. So we wanted to create something where people can interact with, and also feel that their interactions are meaningful, and that they do something in terms of what the interface then gives back to them. But I think also the idea that it's like a phygital space, it's like almost, and if we can continue on that, it's like a mini exhibition. It's also a way of thinking, what would people tell with these interfaces, and what would these stories look like? And that's also something that could be valuable in terms of curating, in terms of trying to incorporate this in bigger exhibitions. But the whole social aspect is also very important. But I think also, and I mean, I'm very excited about data and very excited about linked open data, and I really love working on that. But for a lot of people, this has a really high threshold. For a lot of people, it's very abstract, and by really putting it back into a more physical entity with a physical interface, you can unlock or leverage the power of linked data without putting people's noses in this kind of whole data thing. And that's, I think, also a very important step for us.
And to maybe go back a bit to what you mentioned, Bas, on impact and impact assessment, did we effectively have that impact on that specific neighborhood, you think, with that boundary object?
It would be a pity if we didn't, because we put so many efforts in these neighborhoods, and even without technology, even without culture, even just by organizing these activities, their work like David did and all his colleagues did, just the fact that we did these activities by itself already creates value and adds to the social cohesion. So, so definitely we did something. The aspect whether culture, technology actually increases this effect, it's very hard to disentangle from the raw human power and the enthusiasm of people standing there, dancing, making music. That's still the core of what adds to this increased connections between people and enthusiasm, attracting publics and so on. So to understand what happens more at a more hidden layer, the development of identity and stuff like that. I think that's something that we touched upon, and that's of course 3 months, a 3-month period. I mentioned it several times, is quite short. But if we look at what the different stakeholders in the neighborhoods mentioned also in the interviews and so on, they really told us that what they learned about the neighborhood, that is some kind of fundamental layer or a base that contributes to a higher understanding of what the neighborhood is. So on a theoretical level, that it's feasible to say that this creates like a good start or a good common ground to start from.
Okay, thank you. But to go from a theoretical level back to somebody who was in the field, you were actually there from the policy participation side to really gather different narratives and stories about that neighborhood. How did that for you feel to be there physically with that box and with that community of community workers to work on this project?
It didn't run for itself to invite the citizens and to invite them to the box. So we discovered very quickly that we have to organize a lot of workshops and activities. So in that sense, it would be more attractive to citizens to visit the box. So that was a first discovery for us. So the efforts that are needed to invite the people to discover the collection of Ghent, they are very big, but it's worthwhile. At the other hand, it's not enough to organize some activities around the box or in the box. You have also to do some outreaching work as a field worker, as a storyteller. That means that you have to discover the neighborhood. You have to make many contacts with new people, citizens that you don't know yet. But that's the most interesting part of it. Now there are some new coalitions made, new contacts. New co-working with citizens, but like Bas said, 3 months is absolutely very short. Yep. It tastes for more, and you always have to reconsider that you need a period after you left the neighborhood.
And aftercare.
And aftercare.
Period,
that's crucial. You need that.
Okay, thank you.
How do you think, David, if I can also ask a question?
Yeah, of course.
This is something we do every day also beyond this project, but where this technology increases or leverages these activities like exploring neighborhoods, looking for stories, where this technology makes a difference from your perspective?
I think that technology can facilitate it, and it's a good help to share the collections with people. So it's an advantage when you have the technology as a partner between the neighborhoods and the collections and then the technology. That's for sure that it helped us to invite the citizens to discover the collections. Mm-hmm. But it's not only a top-down story, because I was very curious about the co-creation fund, and there we led the citizens. We gave them funding for exploring on the technology way, also creative, but also technology way to let other citizens discover the collection of Ghent. Mm-hmm. And that's for me a big step that we took. That it's not only we that organized it with the technology, but we share it with the citizens.
Maybe if I can add something. The role of technology and the whole idea of technology being a tool, it's essentially a tool in order to create tools. Because if you look at a museum collection, especially for design, once it comes inside of the collection, it becomes afunctional. It loses its function as a tool, it becomes an object. Mm-hmm. And then the whole thing that I really liked about the co-creation fund and about exposing these objects in different kind of contexts is that they become carriers of information, they become carriers of other values, of other readings. And that's something that's really hard to do in a physical space, but it's much easier to do this on other platforms, through co-creation funds, through an online platform I think that's also very important. That is also what could be the value of data, linked open data, of crowdsourcing for museums. Not in as much as to create a new exhibition that's a digital twin of what's inside of the museum, but to create an open ground, a breeding ground for people to also bring in other voices on objects that are mainly indeed described as being something from Ghent and from a white male perspective.
Okay. I have a question that is mostly related to Bas, coming from Ioana on YouTube. I was also wondering, have you studied the feedback gained in terms of boosting well-being through these pop-up hubs that promote engagement, participation and social inclusion? So how I read it is more about what was methodology, how did you, from a research perspective, were active in the neighborhood, and how did you measure actually those impacts?
Yeah, so we didn't specifically focus on well-being. What we did is we studied mainly the social cohesion aspects related to the box and the activities in and around the box. That was our focus. Right. And we studied that using a bit of quantitative research, but mainly through participatory observations, ethnographic research, combined with a wide range of interviews with several key informants, neighborhood residents, neighborhood stakeholders, project partners, and so on. And we mainly focused on the two domains that were also in my presentation, like social cohesion. On the one hand, how did people relate to others inside their neighborhood? And where did the box and all the activities played a role in enhancing or decreasing even, because we were looking for to show that our hypotheses were not correct. That's how we approached that as a researcher. And the second thing was then everything that's related to cultural participation. So we did not focus specifically on well-being, although we of course theoretically know and also described in the beginning of the project that social cohesion is also again a means to an end. If we have a better social cohesion in a neighborhood, we know that also mental well-being is better. The healthcare needs get better met and stuff like that. So we didn't look specifically at well-being, but we see social cohesion as like a starting point to strengthen the tissue of a neighborhood and have good effects on several other domains such as well-being.
Okay, thank you for that. And also it's a very difficult topic, but also very interesting to look at how technology impacts or data impacts social cohesion or well-being and so forth. It's not a direct measurement you can do, but thank you for that response. I want to go back to Line, because I haven't asked you a question. One of the main was how do you keep partners on board after 3 years in such a complex project? Just to reiterate in what you said, it's 18 partners, 120 people, with only 5 of them sitting right here. How do you manage that, and how do you make sure they're all aligned?
Yeah, in this project, heritage data needed to come out of the silos, but also the people needed to come out of the silos, and that was really a really big challenge. It was a unique opportunity to have European funding to do a really typical Ghent project. We all spoke the same language, but sometimes it seemed that we all spoke different languages anyway. The realities of the engineers, the neighborhood workers, the marketeers, the ITers, the product developers, everybody speaks their own language. So it was the main task was to make sure that everybody worked together, that everybody was involved in this co-creation process, and that was often a big challenge if people lost track of what the main goal was, or a lot of blind spots, a lot of things that we didn't think of in advance, because it's such a big and complex process. So yeah, to make sure that everybody kept walking in the same direction, that was quite a challenge.
Okay, thank you. And I think I saw it in the last slide that Olivier mentioned. You see a lot of people, but behind, there are software developers, there are community workers, there are data managers, there are a lot of sorts of type of people who all come together on one project, which is not evident if it's the first time you do that as a whole group. You wanted to pick up, Bas?
Perhaps something on top of that is what is interesting if you bridge domains. It's not only different languages, but also completely different cultures and ways of working. University is typically slow, city is usually slow, software development is then very quick in sprints, and so all these, it's not like the project suddenly is a company that can be managed as a company. It's like a temporary connection of different cultures that need to somehow synchronize with each other. And I think one of the things we also discussed throughout the project is how do you manage then a strong top-down, like we saw the Gantt charts and stuff like that, in relation to like this raw energy that's coming from the bottom, like people with talents that are doing already all kinds of interesting stuff even without our project. And how do you manage like top-down strictly governing everything versus nurturing what's coming from the bottom in a way that somehow doesn't create chaos?
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that's one of the main questions, and then I'll pick up to you, Olivier. And should you be allowed to restart with today's knowledge, what would you approach differently? And I think my answer to what you just mentioned was also this project was really built up as something very irrational. We're going to build X, Y, Z in this amount of time, but we haven't taken into account as much as initially was needed into the relational part rather than the rational part. How do we make sure that we understand each other? How do we make sure we're all on that level playing field and that we're building this together rather than just a lot of people following and a few people leading? And I think that was also a shift that we needed within the project, but we did manage, maybe at the end of the project, but we did manage in some way. Did you want to respond to that as well, Olivier?
Yeah, and maybe it even corresponds to what you just said. It's a very relational project. It's a relational project between partners, between humans. But for me, it's also a relational project towards culture, towards cultural objects. And if you look and think about culture, and for example, think about an archive or a museum, it's about taking care and it's about expressing care. We are taking care for objects, and we also want to take care for the voices behind these objects. But that's also a very contested ground, and that's something that I think also created a lot of tension within the project, but which also meant that people really do care for culture. Like a City Museum of Ghent, who owned an object, wasn't very comfortable if the Design Museum Ghent then would take another reading of that same object, because they like safeguard this kind of one-directional reading. But I think that just opening up this kind of conversation is so important. And I guess that's the same thing with the Co-Creation Fund. Everybody's now very happy that all these results came out. But in the beginning, everybody was also like, oh, we don't know what's going to happen. We don't know what people are going to do with our collections. The same thing with the linked open data. Oh, now people can do anything with it. Yes, okay, but it's also a way of giving it back to the people, these collections. Yeah.
You wanted to pick up?
We felt it ourselves that in the beginning it was hard working because it was like a new family with some strangers, and each museum has its old culture and the field workers and the storytellers, and you have to build in a phase for learning each other with the culture and the way of working. And we felt it on the first neighborhood versus the third neighborhood. Bas told it in his presentation. It was a big difference. At the third neighborhood, we were like a rolling machine, and it all managed very well. But in the first, it was really looking for each other and for decoding the culture of the way of working.
Yeah. Decoding is important.
Decoding, yes.
Did you want to pick up as well, Line? And then maybe François from an external perspective, but I'm going to start with you, Line.
Yeah, maybe if we would do the project again, we would take more time to take different steps. First, build this collection, and then take a lot of time. A second step, take a lot of time to go in the neighborhoods with the different people from the different perspectives. And if we get familiar with each other, with each other's way of working, then think about how could technology support us in different ways, so that would have given us more time to get to know each other, to redefine certain goals or products that we need to develop.
You can counter, and then I'll give the floor to François. Yeah.
I think we should go even quicker and build a box in the first month, because I think that once the box became tangible, that then suddenly we grew towards each other. So I think we need a common artifact very soon in the project to actually know what we are talking about. And although the project would be less participatory and so on, it would help us develop like this common design language that we need to contribute and understand what this is actually about. So I don't think taking much more time.
Speeding up in the formative phase, but maybe slowing down in the social cohesion and validation phase, where you need more than 3 months.
Perhaps also
to
take steps back, but have a tangible thing early enough in such a project.
Yeah, it's a good call. And you, François, from an external perspective, as an UIA expert and designer, how would you look at this project? How would you redo a project like this if you got the chance to submit it for the UIA?
I will deal with you first, of course, with all of you, because you made a very great job. I think that picking up on this question of time that you just discussed, I would certainly try to have more iterations. So starting with very early versions, before, in a certain way, you have all the technological machine ready. I have the impression from my culture of design that you gain a lot in having a lot of iterative loops from trying and testing and improving and so on. That, in a certain way, when you are lost in translation, helps you to find concrete elements. Also, of course, I would do it without the COVID, because I think I know that you are. It's a sort of general point for everybody in the world, but I think that you had a lot of assets in participation in this city, and I know that you defend yourself that it was. The COVID did not affect so much the project, but I think that it affected this trial and error, very strong dynamic that I've seen in other projects in this city. So I think I would try it without COVID.
That's a good tip. I remember being in the first talks about the cultural participation toolkit, and we were in a Zoom call with an 85-year-old Ledebergnaar trying to figure out how to unmute his mic, and it was really hard to start actually the formative phase while you can't even see each other in a social cohesion project, which is very difficult indeed.
I think we also, before we knew that COVID was coming, we also envisioned a lot of methodologies and a lot of steps to go into the neighborhoods long before the box would end there. But just because of COVID, we couldn't go there, or it was a lot more difficult to even find the people we needed to have this conversation with. And then at the other hand, this whole formative phase, we have all these kind of domains, different languages, different ways of communicating. And you had to do this online via a medium that some people are not even acquainted with. So did it change the project? Did it affect the project? Certainly. It would be an assumption if it would have turned out differently. But I think it would have given us more room to experiment and create earlier prototypes, because we actually had that kind of vehicle in the project. But we weren't able to do it because of COVID. Yeah.
Just looking at the time, one of the most important questions I wanted to ask to all of you was, what do you see as the most important conclusion or learning that we can take to another city, another archive, another museum who are watching today, or maybe we'll follow up later on? What do we want to give them as a sort of takeaway to take to their own environment? And I'm going to start with Bas.
I would say that in the first place, yes, these kinds of initiatives create value. It works with the assets that you already have in your city. You have a lot of these artifacts already in place. Most of these cities, I hope, are already proceeding in the digitalization of their collections. But it doesn't end there, and there's a lot of potential in doing something with these technologies. I don't think other cities should try to build the kind of box that we made, because I don't think the added value is in the creation of a high-end technology environment. You should look for the connection with space. So do something with a container or a party tent or whatever. So look for the connection with space, but look for or try to develop tools that leverage the potential of this digitized cultural heritage So I would say at the enabling level, we should work together somehow and create an infrastructure that we can share with as much institutes and cities as we can, and combine our forces. But then each city should look for ways to engage others to work with this data, both in terms of programs and subsidies and so on, but also in the development of new tools that help to democratize ways of working with these data. So that would be my main advice.
Okay, good to know. I'm gonna maybe pick up to you, Lina. How would you show the most important learning or conclusion?
Yeah, I would say, and definitely to all the city services, go on and experiment. If you see what energy it brought to all the people involved to try out completely new things, also a lot of frustrations, but in the end, a lot of learnings and energy. So really briefly, go on and experiment where you can.
Okay, interesting. And for you, David?
Yes, invest in innovation. It's worthwhile, but it's a digital innovation, but innovation in all kinds of way. Also for storytelling, for field workers. So invest and break out. That's a main goal also for the musea. Break out. It's the hidden heritage. It's in every corner of every neighborhood, but you have to take time, enough time to discover it. That's my main.
I love the actionable innovation part of it. I think that's my main takeaway as well, or my main learning. Whether you start from technological innovation, make sure that you have enough time to look at the business case, what is actually happening here, what are you trying to solve, but also vice versa, starting from the business case. What am I trying to solve here, and what aspects or what expertise do I lack, and how do I make sure that I can combine that aside from what I already have as a sort of expertise? And for you, Olivier, what's the main learning for you?
I guess this is going to be a bit disrupting, but for me it's not about the money. You don't need 5 million or 6 million euros to do this. It's more about, as you say, breaking out of your comfort zone, but in order to find that space, you kind of need resources. But I think the biggest value in the project was just that we found academici, we found social workers, museums, different kind of museums. We found city workers, we found the people working at a higher level in the city. And I think this is very, very important to start the conversation. And I do believe, to re-emphasize this, the tension that was there was because people really actually cared. And you can also have a project where you have a lot of money and it just goes very smoothly, but then on the end of the line, people don't care anymore. It's like, okay, we did it, fine. And now we created this kind of tension that could be like a potential to start a really, maybe more broader conversation, or smaller. And even start small, because small interventions can lead up to very big
CoGhent is not the end.
No, definitely. I want to give the last word to our friend François. And what was your main learning or takeaway? Because you mentioned the ingredients, but where's the cake? Now you saw the cake. What is the main ingredient you want to take back?
I think that it's for me maybe a sort of next step is if I may say, the project is still in the hand of the stakeholders and not so much of a population. It's, as some have said, it's a tool that could support participation. But I really think that it's an enabling tool for people themselves. So I would try to advise cities that they looked at it not as a tool for them, for their job, but to give back not only the stories, but to give back the tool to the citizen and to enable them to manipulate more these cultural elements that are so difficult but so precious at the moment.
Okay, thank you very much for all your feedback and for this wonderful Q&A, and thank you guys at home for asking those different questions. I'm afraid we have to wrap up here. I would just love to invite you to definitely check out our website. So this is the last communicative event that we're doing on the project, but behind the scenes we're still building a lot of deliverables and outputs that might be interesting for different museums, cities, archives and so forth, and those will be coming up on our website, Collections.Ghent, in the coming months. So definitely head up to that website or keep it in touch for the coming months. And also, if you have any questions, our contact details are also on the same website. Feel free to reach out to have more in-depth questions on whether it's the impact assessment, how it's approached from the museum or from the community workers. Feel free to ask. We're still here to answer all those questions. But without further ado, thank you to all you guys. Thank you to the audience listening together. And I will see you in the next time. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.